boys and girls and friends who'd like to watch. Today we're going to read another story, and this one is called Franny's Nest. One bright spring morning, Franny Robin, who was rather old-fashioned in her ways, met modern, up-to-date Fancy Robin in a cherry tree. "Good morning," chirped Fancy. "Have you chosen a place for your nest yet?" "Yes, I've decided to build in that big pine in front of the house," answered Franny. "How about you?" Fancy pointed in the opposite direction. She knew it would never do for her to build her nest in the same territory as Franny. There wouldn't be enough food for two families. Robins know their manners better than that. Now, if it were a different type of bird, who didn't need the same kind of food as the robin, that would be a different matter. "That apple tree over there suits me fine," said Fancy, "and I must get started this very morning. Come over for a visit when you've finished." Fancy flew back to her own territory and began the arduous task of looking for building materials. "Every spring it's the same," she grumbled. "I have to search and search for proper building materials. Bark, twigs." Fancy stopped in the middle of her sentence. Her beady eye had discovered something on the ground. Quickly she made a graceful landing beside the objects of her curiosity. The trash collector had been rather careless that morning, and a large number of pink facial tissues had blown out of the trash can when he took off the cover to empty it. He had not bothered to pick them up. "What have we here?" exclaimed Fancy excitedly. "Just the thing for my nest! What a streak of good luck! And so pretty, too!" She picked up as much of the tissue as she could carry in her beak and flew her way to the apple tree. In a moment, she was back for more. Fancy chuckled to herself as she made the foundation of her nest with the facial tissues. This was so much easier than scouting about for bark and twigs. "I'll just mix in a few leaves and presto, my nest will be done. Really, this is much better than the old-fashioned way." In no time at all, Fancy had finished her nest. It looked neat and strong, hidden among the leaves of the apple tree. She stood off on a branch to admire her work. "I really must fly over to the pine tree and tell Franny about my good fortune," Fancy said to herself. Then she added generously, "Franny is my friend. I'll tell her about my find. There is enough left for her to use some for her nest, too." Feeling very pleased with herself, Fancy flew across the yard into the pine tree next door. She made it plain from the start that she wasn't hunting nest materials or food in Franny's territory, just visiting. Franny had just come back to the tree with a sizable piece of bark in her beak. "Oh, Franny," gushed Fancy, "I've had the best luck. I found a whole pile of modern building materials in the backyard next door, and I used them for my nest foundation. I didn't have to search much at all for materials." "Would you believe it? I'm already finished building." "Already finished?" gasped Franny. "Why, I am barely started." "I know," agreed Fancy sympathetically. "When you do it the old-fashioned way, it takes ever so long. Now me, I'm always for trying something new and modern." "But this building material you spoke of," said Franny, "is it as strong as twigs and bark?" "Of course. Come and see how my nest looks. And if you like," Fancy cocked her head on the one side and spoke in a bird whisper so no one else would hear, "I'll show you where you can find some of this modern building material for yourself." In a moment, Franny was looking over Fancy's nest. "It looks sturdy enough," she said. "And it is," chirped Fancy confidently. "Come and get some of the same material for yourself." When Franny lighted beside the trash on the ground near the trash can, she hesitated. "Is this the flimsy stuff, the building material you spoke of?" "Why, yes. What's wrong with it?" "I wouldn't trust it for my foundation. Thanks for showing it to me. But I prefer to build my nest the old-fashioned way." And Franny flew off. "Old-fashioned!" screamed Fancy after her. "You're hopelessly old-fashioned. Ungrateful bird!" sputtered Fancy angrily. "Let her work her feathers off if she likes. I'm going to enjoy myself." Fancy spent the rest of the day gossiping with her friends and hunting fat, juicy worms for herself. The next day, she laid her eggs in her nest. Franny finally finished her nest and laid her eggs too. Both birds watched over their eggs carefully, never leaving them except to get a bit of food for themselves. But one night it rained. It was not just a quick shower, but a hard, steady rain that lasted all night. Franny spread her wings over her eggs and settled herself for a restful sleep while waiting for the rain to stop. She did not worry. She knew her nest could survive the storm. Fancy sat on her eggs too, but she worried. The bottom of the nest was getting soggy. Could it be that the modern building material, bright and soft as it was, did not make a good nest foundation? After a restless night, Fancy found out. Along toward morning, the foundation of her nest gave way completely. Down, down, down dropped the precious eggs to the ground beneath. Fancy looked sadly at the broken eggs from her perch in the apple tree. Maybe it would have been better if she'd stuck to the old-fashioned materials, after all, she thought sorrowfully to herself. Many people today, even boys and girls, are like Fancy. They prefer new modern ways. They think the Bible is too old-fashioned to believe and follow. They think their own way is better and more up-to-date. All too late, when the storms of life, troubles and disappointments, temptations and trials, hard circumstances or situations come to them, they discover they do not have a solid foundation upon which to stand, and their life house comes crashing down around them. Then they are sad and disappointed and discouraged and don't know which way to turn. The Bible tells us of a wise man and a foolish man. One built his house on a rock foundation, while the other built on the sand. When the storms came, the house on the sand was swept away, but the house on the rock stood firm. A solid foundation for a house, or our homes, is of great importance. Of even greater importance is the foundation upon which we build our lives. The only foundation we can trust to build our lives upon is an old-fashioned one, the Lord Jesus Christ and His Word, the Bible. Jesus said, "Whosoever heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock." And that is our little story about Franny's nest. And I hope that you, boys and girls, are building your foundation on the Bible, on the old-fashioned Bible and Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you again next week.